They say a name is just a sound, air pushed through flesh, shaped by teeth and tongue. But the day he spoke mine, the world rearranged itself around that single breath. I remember that morning not because of the dawn, nor the cold stone beneath my knees, nor even the aching weight of grief that had hollowed my chest. I remember it because it was the first time since the darkness left me that I felt the earth hold me again, instead of swallowing me whole. Before him, my name had been a curse. Mary, whispered with disgust. Mary, spoken with distance. Mary, paired with labels I did not choose and chains I could not break. I was the woman mothers pointed at when warning their daughters. I was the story respectable men told to their sons about what happens when a life veers off the path of expectation. They never asked why I had fallen. They simply agreed I had. But he saw something else, something no one else dared to believe existed in me. And yet, on that morning, even that memory was nearly gone, crushed beneath the weight of his death. I walked toward the tomb with spices trembling in my hands, each step heavier than the last. The other women whispered behind me, but their voices were muffled by the sound of my own heartbeat. Slow, dragging, disbelieving. I had seen him die. I had watched the life leave his eyes while the sky itself seemed to break in half. I had stood there, powerless, just as I had been powerless in every moment before he found me. But grief is a kind of devotion too, and so I walked. The garden was quiet, too quiet for Jerusalem during the season of Passover. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. The wind touched the hem of my robe as if unsure whether to comfort me or carry me away. My fingers clenched the jar of myrrh so tightly the lid cut into my palm. Pain grounded me. It always had. Even after the demons left, the body remembers its history. And then I saw it, the stone rolled away. For a moment I could not breathe. The world narrowed to a single impossible detail. The entrance gaping open like a wound. My first thought was fear, but not the supernatural kind. Rome always took what it wanted: bodies, hope, peace. Why would they leave him his rest? I ran inside. The air was cold, still, the scent of earth thick enough to taste. The linens lay folded, arranged with a care that made my skin prickle. This was no grave robbery. This was deliberate, intentional. Why? I whispered to the empty space. But the tomb did not answer. The world outside seemed to tilt, as if the sun itself had lost its footing. I stumbled out, the tears already rising, choking me, burning the way old wounds do when touched. The gardener, I thought. Someone nearby. Someone must have seen something. Woman, why do you weep? The voice came from behind me, calm as water. I didn't turn at first. My grief was a wall, and every question struck it without breaking through. They have taken my Lord, I managed, and I don't know where they laid him. And then he said it. Mary. Just that. Just my name. But it was enough to reorder the universe. There are voices we respond to with our ears, and voices we answer with our souls. His belonged to the second kind. When he spoke my name, every memory I had ever buried rose like breath after drowning. The laughter by the well, the dust of the road on his sandals, the quiet moments when he taught without words, simply by being near. The way he looked at the broken as if seeing the blueprint of who they could become, rather than the rubble they were. Turned. And there he was, alive, not as an angel, not as a vision, not as the ghost my grief might have conjured. No, alive in the way sunlight is alive, in the way water is alive, in the way truth is alive even when denied. My knees gave out. My fingers reached toward him out of instinct, out of memory, out of love too overwhelming to contain. But he stepped back gently, the same gentleness he had always shown me. Do not cling to me, he said, not because he rejected me, but because his work was not finished. Mine, however, was just beginning. In that single breath, he gave me a purpose larger than my past, larger than my shame, larger even than the darkness that had once claimed me. He gave me a message, mission, a place in the story no one expected someone like me to have. He called my name, and nothing would ever be the same again. I did not rise from the ground immediately. My hands were still trembling, hovering in the empty air where his presence had just been. Warm, alive, impossibly real. The world felt unsteady beneath me, like the first steps after an illness, when the body remembers how to move but the soul is still catching up. Every part of me wanted to chase him, to close the distance he had gently refused, to cling to what had once been my anchor in a storm. But his words lingered like a command dressed in tenderness. Do not cling to me. He was not rejecting me. I understood that almost instantly, though the human part of me, the part that had learned to hold tightly to anyone who showed kindness, ached all the same. His tone held no distance, only purpose. The same purpose I had seen in his eyes the day he found me, trembling and fragmented, when the darkness inside me roared like a beast chained too long. That day he had spoken a different command, but with the same unwavering certainty. Be free. And the demons fled as if his voice had been fire. Now freedom tasted different. It tasted like responsibility. The garden around me felt alive again, colors sharpening as if creation itself leaned closer to witness what had happened. Light poured through the branches overhead, scattering patterns across the earth like 1,000 small blessings. Even the silence felt transformed, no longer heavy with death, but humming with possibility. My breath came fast, ragged, as if my ribs were too small to hold the enormity of what my eyes had seen. I pressed a hand to my chest, half expecting my heart to race itself into collapse. But beneath my palm I felt something new. Not panic, not grief, but purpose. A kind of holy acceleration. I had to tell them. The thought landed in my mind with the same force as his voice had spoken my name. I had to tell the others. The disciples. The brothers who had walked with him, who had sworn loyalty, who had fled in fear. I had to tell them he was alive. Alive. The word felt too small for the truth, but it was the only one my human tongue could offer. I lifted my skirts and ran. I ran the way I had once fled from people who wanted to stone me. I ran the way I had once run from the shadows that hunted me inside my own mind. Except now I ran toward something, not away. The ground blurred beneath my feet, the garden wall flashing past me like a pale streak. My lungs burned, but I welcomed the pain. It meant I was alive enough to feel it. It meant he had chosen me to carry the news. Me. The woman they whispered about behind closed doors. The woman they pretended not to recognize in daylight. The woman they labeled before they learned her name. How strange, how divine, that heaven itself trusted me with the first announcement of the resurrection. That the one who had defeated death chose someone death had nearly swallowed. As I crossed the streets of Jerusalem, people turned to stare. Some recognized me and stepped aside quickly, their expressions twisting with old judgments. Others simply saw a woman running and muttered in disapproval. Respectability is a prison many people never realize they live inside. I had broken out long before, but now I was running with the keys in my hands. By the time I reached the house where the disciples hid, my throat felt raw, and my legs threatened to collapse. Pounded on the door. No answer. Again. Still nothing. They were terrified, I realized. Terrified of Rome, of the Sanhedrin, of being recognized, of being crucified next. Fear had become the ruler of the house. Open the door. I shouted, my voice cracking like dry wood. There was shuffling inside. Whispering. Someone argued in a hushed tone. Finally, the latch lifted, and a single wary eye peered through the crack. Mary! The door opened a little more. What are you? He's alive. The words burst from me, uncontained, unstoppable. He's alive. I saw him. I spoke to him. He called my name. Faces emerged from the darkness of the room. Peter, John, Matthew, Andrew. Each of them pale and hollow-eyed, as if grief had carved them into softer men stripped bare of certainty. They stared at me as though my words were impossible, offensive even. Peter stepped closer, his brow furrowed deeply. What do you mean you saw him? I mean he is risen, I answered, the truth ringing through the room like a bell struck in the dead of night. The tomb is empty. The stone is rolled away. The linens are folded. He stood before me, and he called me by my name. A murmur spread among them. Fear, hope, disbelief tangled together. John's eyes softened first, the way they always did when confronted with something holy. But Peter looked like a man torn open. A man whose shame and love were battling inside him like storm winds. "Mary," he whispered, "are you certain?" "Certain." There are truths that do not require certainty because they ignite the soul before the mind has time to question. I had not imagined his voice. I had not invented the warmth in his eyes or the way the garden brightened at his presence. "I am more certain of this," I said, "than I have ever been of anything in my life." The room held its breath. It was not the first time I had stood before them, carrying news they struggled to accept. But this time something shifted. Something in the air cracked open like a seed breaking soil. For the first time, they did not see the woman I had been. They saw the witness I had become. In the dim room where the disciples hid, my words did not land softly. They struck like lightning, brilliant, terrifying, impossible to ignore. "You must understand. These men had walked with him, eaten with him, laughed with him. They had seen him raise the dead, calm storms, multiply loaves, and silence demons. Yet the thought of him alive again after such a brutal, undeniable death, it rattled them. Hope can be more frightening than despair. Despair asks nothing of you. Hope demands everything." Their eyes flicked between one another, searching for confirmation they could not find, reaching for faith that felt too painful to touch. I watched their faces, etched with sleeplessness, fear, and something quieter. Something like shame. They had abandoned him. They had run. They had hidden when the world darkened at his crucifixion. They had scattered like broken pieces of a shattered promise. And yet, he had chosen me to see him first. The weight of that truth pressed against my ribs with equal parts wonder and sorrow. I never sought to be first. I never desired to take any place among them. I only wanted to remain close to the one who had freed me. The one who had looked into my darkness and called me daughter. The one who taught me that my past was not a prophecy but a place I no longer lived. But God writes his own stories, and he often chooses the hands least expected to carry them. Peter stepped forward, shoulders tense. His eyes were red, whether from grief or guilt I could not tell. Perhaps both. "Mary, what exactly did he say to you?" His voice trembled as though the question might break him further. I swallowed hard. The memory of his voice, soft, steady, impossibly alive, washed over me again. "He asked why I wept," I said. "Then he spoke my name. Just my name." You would think a name is such a small thing to offer, but after death, after the silence of the grave, after despair so crushing it felt like the earth itself had stopped turning, one's own name spoken in love becomes a resurrection in itself. "He said not to cling to him," I continued, "that he had not yet ascended. And he told me to come to you, to tell you he is going to his Father and yours, to his God and yours." A breath rippled through the room, collective and fragile. It was as if my words lifted a veil from the air, revealing the first glimmer of dawn after a night that had lasted far too long. But hope does not replace fear instantly. It presses against it, nudging, challenging, demanding acknowledgement. Andrew ran a hand through his hair. "Mary, you know we love you," he said, voice gentle. "But grief can play tricks. People see visions in mourning, especially when..." A spark of old anger flared inside me. Not the harmful, consuming anger that once lived within the demons he expelled, but the anger of a woman who refused to be dismissed. "A vision," I repeated, my voice low and steady. "Did a vision roll away the stone? Did a vision fold his burial cloths? Did a vision call me by name with a voice I have known better than my own heartbeat?" The room fell silent again. John was the first to lower his head. "We should go," he whispered. "We should see for ourselves." Peter nodded, though hesitantly. I could see the torment in his eyes. He wanted to believe me. Oh, how he wanted to. But his shame stood between him and hope like a wall. The memory of his denial haunted him more deeply than he dared admit aloud. They rushed out, leaving me in the half-lit room with the other women. My hand still trembled, but my heart burned with a strange new conviction. Not pride, not triumph. Divine assignment. Sacred responsibility. I had always followed. Now I was leading, though I had never asked to. The hours that followed passed in a blur. The disciples returned, breathless, shaken, their faces pale with wonder. John confirmed what I had said. The stone truly had been rolled away. The cloths were exactly as I described. Peter had gone into the tomb himself and emerged with tears shining like broken glass in his beard. But still some hesitated, some wondered, some feared. Belief rarely blooms all at once. It grows root by root, often through the cracks left by grief. That night, as shadows pooled in the corners of the house, I sat alone, hands folded in my lap. The others whispered in the next room, trying to untangle the impossible. But I felt something else. Warmth, presence, a stirring in the air that told me the story was not finished. I thought back to all the moments I had spent by his side, watching him heal, watching him teach, watching him breathe life into those who had forgotten how to live. I thought about the day he freed me, the day the darkness fled like thieves in the night. For years my mind had been a battlefield. My thoughts were not my own. But his voice, it cut through the chaos. Clear, steady, sovereign. When he called my name that first time, he did not speak to the demons. He spoke to me. And I remembered myself. On this day, he had done it again. I did not know what would happen next. I did not know if Rome would come for us, if the world would swallow us, if the truth would be believed or buried. But I knew this: he lived. He breathed. He called my name. And that meant the darkness had not won. Not then, not now, not ever. Hope had risen from the grave. And it had chosen me to announce it. Night in Jerusalem carries its own kind of weight. It settles into the stones, into the cracks of the walls, into the breath of every living soul. That night, after I returned from the tomb, after Peter and John confirmed what I had seen, after the disciples locked the doors again in fear of what Rome might do next, the darkness felt different. Not oppressive, not suffocating, not like the nights I once knew, when shadows inside me whispered and pulled at my mind like cruel hands. No, this night felt alive. The air felt charged, like lightning hiding just behind the sky. Yet the house remained tense. The disciples huddled together, whispering in tight circles. They repeated the same questions over and over. Asterisk how? Why? What now? Asterisk they asked them as if the answers might appear in the air, or in one another's eyes, or in the memory of his voice. Fear and hope warred inside them, and neither side gained ground. I sat apart in a corner lit by the faint glow of an oil lamp. The flame flickered in nervous patterns, throwing trembling shadows across the walls. My hands were clasped tightly, knuckles white. I wasn't frightened, not in the way they were. I had lived too many years in the company of true terror to confuse it with uncertainty. What the disciples feared was not the unknown, it was responsibility. And responsibility is far heavier than fear. I understood it too well. I had carried it since he spoke my name that morning. Since the garden. Since the moment my grief cracked open and made room for wonder. Every now and then, one of the men would glance at me, as if expecting me to speak again, to offer more, to somehow steady the earth beneath our feet. But what could I say? How does one explain being chosen by the risen Messiah to deliver the first message of resurrection? How does one describe the indescribable? And more than that, how does one keep breathing when the world has suddenly become larger and holier and more terrifying than ever? As the hours passed, the tension in the house thickened. Thomas paced back and forth, muttering to himself. Peter stared at the wall, lost in shadows only he could see. I recognized that kind of guilt. It is a companion that clings long after forgiveness is offered. John sat quietly, eyes closed, as though trying to steady his heart by remembering every word Jesus had ever spoken. What none of us expected, what none of us dared to imagine, was how quickly everything would shift. It began with a sound, soft, almost imperceptible, like the faint rustling of cloth. The kind of sound the human mind dismisses until it becomes undeniable. I turned my head. The lamp flame quivered, responding to a wind that was not there. The door remained firmly barred. The windows shut. Light. Not the harsh blaze of the sun. Not the flicker of fire. A soft, steady radiance that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The disciples froze. Breath ceased. Time itself seemed to halt out of reverence. And then he stood there. Not as I had seen him in the garden. Intimate, gentle, speaking one name. Here he was something more. Something larger. Something quietly powerful. Like the stillness before the sea separates, or the moment before a blind man opens his eyes. "Peace be with you," he said. The words washed over us like warm rain. The kind of peace he offered was not comfort. It was authority. It was promise. It was command. Some of the disciples fell to their knees. Others stared in stunned silence. None dared move. I felt my heart expand, stretching impossibly wide inside my chest, as if it needed to make room for the enormity of the moment. He showed them his hands. The wounds remained, not as injuries but as proof. Proof of love so fierce it had wrestled with death and won. Proof of sacrifice freely chosen. Proof that glory does not always come wrapped in ease. The disciples gasped. Some cried. Some covered their faces with trembling hands. Peter made a sound I will never forget. A mixture of relief and agony, as if the sight of him healed and wounded him all at once. For a moment he looked around the room. His eyes landed on each of them, one by one, lingering with understanding deeper than words. And then he looked at me. It was not the same look he gave me in the garden. That look had been personal, intimate, like dawn touching a soul. This look was something else. A recognition. Reminder. A confirmation that what had happened earlier was not only intentional, it was ordained. I lowered my eyes, overwhelmed, humbled beyond comprehension. "You will be my witnesses," he said, "to the ends of the earth." Witnesses. The word echoed in my bones. In the garden I had been the first. But now we all stood under the same calling. To carry the truth. To carry the story. To carry him. The air thickened with holiness. The world shifted again, realigning itself around the resurrected Messiah. Everything he had ever taught us, every miracle, every parable, every moment of compassion, collapsed into clarity. He breathed on them and I felt it too, though I stood apart. That breath carried a promise, a power, a future none of us could yet comprehend. And then, just as suddenly as he had come, he was gone. The room erupted. Some shouted. Some wept. Some laughed in disbelief. But all of us felt the same thing. A fire beginning to burn inside us. A fire lit by the breath of God himself. I touched my chest, feeling the stirring of something eternal. I had seen him in death. I had spoken to him in life. And now I had witnessed him in glory. I knew, with a certainty deeper than my own heartbeat, that the world would never again be what it had been. And neither would I. For a long time after he vanished from the room, none of us moved. The silence that followed his departure was not emptiness. It was fullness. Sacred. Heavy. Alive. It felt like the lingering warmth on the skin after stepping away from a fire. The disciples stared at the place where he had stood as if expecting the air itself to continue speaking. And perhaps it was. Perhaps holiness leaves an echo. I pressed a hand against my heart because it felt too large, too full for my small frame. Everything inside me hummed with purpose, as though my soul had become a harp string struck by the touch of God. I had no language for what was happening. None of us did. Even those who had walked the closest with him seemed lost between joy and terror, between awe and disbelief. But beneath it all there was certainty, clear, unwavering, eternal. He lived, and because he lived, everything else had to be reimagined. The world, the future, ourselves. The disciples began to speak all at once, their voices tripping over one another. "Did you see his hands? He breathed. Mary, you were right." Their shock tangled with excitement, and though fear still circled their hearts, It was no longer king. Something new was ruling the room. Something I recognized. Hope with teeth. Hope that bites back at darkness. Peter approached me first. He looked different. Not burdened, not crushed. For the first time since the courtyard of the high priest, the shame in his eyes seemed to loosen its grip. His features softened, and a fragile relief flickered across his face. "Mary," he said quietly, "forgive me for doubting you." I studied him, this man who loved Jesus with a fierceness that often outran his wisdom. I saw in him the same aching truth I carried. Regret does not disqualify you from being chosen. Failure does not disqualify you from being beloved. "There is nothing to forgive," I said. "We are all learning how to believe again." He nodded, but tears welled in his eyes anyway. As the disciples continued to speak, I slipped out of the crowded room and found my way to the rooftop. I needed air. I needed sky. I needed a moment where the city did not hem me in with its walls and shadows. The stairs creaked under my feet, familiar and grounding. When I pushed open the rooftop door, the cool night wind rushed into me, carrying the scent of dust and blooming fig trees. Jerusalem stretched out before me, a tapestry of rooftops, silent streets, shuttered windows, and distant torches flickering like restless stars. Everything looked the same as it had the night before. Yet everything was different. The city did not know it yet, but resurrection had happened within its walls. Hope had walked through its streets. Eternity had broken into time. I leaned on the low stone wall and whispered a prayer I did not have words for. Gratitude too deep for speech. Wonder too wide for thought. And beneath it all, a trembling realization. He had chosen me as the first witness. Me. A woman who had once been a vessel of torment. A woman society dismissed. A woman whose testimony carried less weight in a court of law than that of any man. But not to him. To him my voice mattered. To him my presence mattered. To him my name mattered. The memory of the garden pressed in on me. His voice, the sunrise behind him, the way my soul had recognized him before my eyes did. That moment replayed again and again, each time revealing some new tenderness. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. With each breath, the memories of my past, every demon, every wound, every failure, felt farther away as though resurrection had touched them too. Below me, the disciples' voices drifted up faintly. They were arguing now. Thomas was refusing to believe unless he could put his fingers into the wounds. I felt a pang of sympathy for him. Doubt had once been the language my heart spoke fluently. I knew its cadence, its logic, its cruelty. But I also knew the truth now. I had felt it warm on my skin. A sudden weariness settled into my bones, not the heaviness of despair, but the exhaustion that follows miracles. My body, still frail from days of grief, trembled slightly. I sat down, back against the wall, letting the night press cool fingers to my face. I looked up. The stars were scattered across the sky like promises yet to be fulfilled. The moon hung low, glowing pale gold, quiet and watchful. I remembered the night he calmed the storm, how the wind obeyed him as though recognizing its maker. I remembered the day he set me free, how the voices inside me fled in terror at a single word from his lips. Now he had conquered death itself. The realization was so vast it refused to fit into thought. It settled instead into the space between heartbeats, into the marrow of my bones. I did not need to understand it fully to believe it fully. As I sat beneath the open sky, I thought of the mission he had given us, to carry his story to the ends of the earth. I wondered where that path would lead. I wondered what it would demand. I wondered how many nights like this I would live to see. Nights where the veil between heaven and earth felt impossibly thin. But I did not fear. Not anymore. Once I had lived with darkness inside me. I had survived chains no one could see. I had been silenced, shamed, dismissed, cast aside. Yet he had looked at me, really looked, and called me worthy of being seen. When he called my name that morning, something resurrected in me as surely as he had risen from the tomb. Something bold, something unbreakable, something eternal. I pressed a hand to my chest again. My heart felt steady now, Not fragile, not frantic. Steady like a flame shielded from the wind. Steady like a promise. He lived. I had seen him. I had spoken with him. And because of that, nothing, not Rome, not the Sanhedrin, not death itself, could ever silence me again. I did not sleep that night. None of us did. How could we? Sleep belongs to ordinary days, and nothing about this day, this impossible, holy, terrifying day, was ordinary. I stayed on the rooftop until the first pale threads of dawn began stitching themselves into the edge of the sky. The city below was waking slowly, unaware that history had already split in two. Sunrise, I went back inside. The house felt smaller now, crowded not just with bodies but with expectation. Fear had not vanished. Fear rarely does, but it had loosened its grip. Something else pulsed beneath it like an underground spring. Anticipation. The kind that steals breath. The kind that bends the knees. The kind that whispers, "Everything you knew is too small now." The disciples had gathered again in the main room. The lamp still flickered where we had left it, casting long shadows that swayed on the walls like silent witnesses. Peter sat hunched forward, elbows on his knees, rubbing his hands together. John leaned against a pillar, eyes distant, as if memorizing every detail of the night before. Matthew was writing something. He always turned to words when he couldn't contain his thoughts. Andrew sat with his back against the wall, head tipped back, whispering a prayer under his breath. Thomas, however, stood rigid in the corner, arms crossed over his chest, jaw clenched. There was pain in his eyes. Not anger, not pride, but the pain of someone who has lost too much to trust easily again. As I stepped into the room, all eyes turned to me. I felt the weight of their gazes, not heavy, not judgmental, but searching. They still did not fully understand why the risen Messiah had chosen me to see him first. Truthfully, I didn't understand either. But I carried the weight of that grace with reverence, not pride. "Mary," John said softly, "come sit." I shook my head. My body was restless, alive with a fire that made stillness unbearable. "I cannot sit," I said. "Not yet." Peter cracked a tired smile. "I do not think any of us can." Thomas exhaled sharply, frustration cutting through the air. "You are all speaking as though this is simple," he said. "As though the mind should accept what the eyes did not witness." "Not all eyes were denied the vision," I said. My voice was steady, not confrontational. "Yours were. Mine were not." He stiffened. For a moment, I feared I had wounded him. But then something softened in his posture. Not belief, not surrender, but a tiny fissure in his certainty. Doubt is not the enemy of faith. It is the doorstep of it. A knock startled all of us. The room froze. The door was still barred. No one moved. A second knock echoed, louder this time. My heart hammered, not with fear for myself but for them. Rome was merciless. The Sanhedrin was watchful. We were vulnerable. Peter motioned for silence. He crept toward the door, ear pressed against the wood. Then a voice called softly from the other side. "Open the door. Quickly." It was Cleopa. Peter unbarred it, and Cleopa nearly stumbled inside, breathless, eyes wide with disbelief. Another man, his companion, followed behind him. Their robes were dusty from travel. Their faces shimmered with the same stunned awe I had seen in the disciples the night before. "We saw him," Cleopa said, gripping Peter's arm. "On the road to Emmaus. He walked with us, talked with us, broke bread with us. And then he vanished," the other man finished, voice trembling. "Vanished from our sight." A sound rippled through the room, something between a gasp and a prayer. I felt tears sting my eyes. Not of sorrow, of confirmation, of joy so fierce it hurt. Thomas turned pale. "Twice," Peter whispered. "He has appeared twice." "3 times," I corrected quietly. "The garden, here, and now Emmaus." The room shifted again. The disciples looked at one another, fear cracking into wonder, wonder cracking into belief. The impossible had happened not once, but over and over. The world itself seemed determined to prove the truth. But Thomas's voice broke the moment. "It is not enough," he said. His tone was not cruel nor stubborn but broken. "Unless I see the wounds, unless I place my hand in his side, unless I witness it with my own eyes, I cannot believe." His confession fell heavy in the room. I stepped toward him, not to rebuke, not to argue, but because I understood. I had lived in darkness once. I had fought battles inside my mind that no one else could see. I knew what it meant to need proof, to crave something solid when the world felt fractured. "Thomas," I said gently, "your doubt does not offend him. He knows the weight of grief. He knows the frailty of the human heart. He will come for you too." He turned away ashamed. But I believed what I said. I felt it pulsing within me like prophecy. I had seen the way Jesus looked at those he loved, not with disappointment, but with patience deeper than the sea. And he loved Thomas. The hours dragged on slow as honey. Some disciples dozed. Others prayed. Some whispered their confusion to the walls. But I stood by the window, eyes fixed on the shifting sky. The sun dipped. The shadows lengthened. And then, a sudden hush fell over the room, thick and electric. Light spilled into the air, not from the door, not from the windows, but from within the very walls. It was quieter than sunrise, deeper than moonlight, brighter than flame. Jesus appeared again. But this time, he looked directly at Thomas. "Peace be with you," he said. Thomas collapsed against the wall, trembling. Jesus stepped closer. "Put your finger here," he said gently. "See my hands." Thomas shook his head violently, tears pouring down his cheeks. "Put your hand in my side." Thomas sobbed. "Do not be unbelieving," Jesus whispered, "but believe." Thomas fell to his knees. "My Lord and my God." The room dissolved into quiet weeping, stunned reverence, trembling awe. Could not move, could not speak, could only feel the weight of the holy pressing into the walls, into my lungs, into the floor beneath us. He had done it again. He had come for the one who doubted. He had come for the one who feared. He had come for the one who was broken. Just as he had come for me. Just as he still comes. And in that moment, watching Thomas cling to him with the desperation of a drowning man finally tasting air, I understood something I had not seen clearly before. Resurrection was not an event. It was a person. And he was not finished with us yet. After Thomas fell to his knees before him, the room felt as though it had been lifted out of time itself. We were suspended in a moment too holy for breath, too vast for thought. Jesus' presence filled every corner. Not just the air, not just the walls, but the deepest places within us. I had seen him alive before any of them, yet each new appearance struck me with the same force. Awe sharpened by love, love sharpened by purpose. When he vanished again, the silence he left behind was not empty. It pulsed like a heartbeat continuing after the body sleeps. No one spoke for several moments. We were all listening, as if expecting his voice to echo in the stillness. Even Thomas, who had sobbed into his hands, now stared at the ground with a stunned serenity that made him look years younger. For the rest of the evening I watched them, each disciple moving through his own awakening. Belief does not bloom the same way in every heart. For some, it is a sunrise, slow, gentle, unfolding in warm layers. For others, it is lightning, violent, undeniable, splitting the night open. For Thomas, it was both. For Peter, it was a battle between shame and love. For John, it was confirmation of everything he had always dared to hope. For me, belief had begun in darkness long before resurrection ever touched the earth. It had begun in the moment he freed me. But as I stood near the window, looking out at the city where soldiers patrolled and priests whispered, a new understanding took root inside me. Resurrection was not simply something we had witnessed. It was something we were now becoming part of. A story that was no longer unfolding around us, but through us. The disciples began to talk softly among themselves, each voice filled with excitement edged with fear. They asked what this meant for Israel, for Rome, for the world. Some wondered if Jesus would overthrow the empire. Others whispered about prophecy. A few dared to dream of returning to Galilee, to the quiet shores where they had first been called. But none of them asked the question that settled heavy in my chest. What does this mean for me? Not because I doubted, but because I knew more deeply than anyone else in that room, that being chosen carries a cost. I slipped outside into the small courtyard. The night air was cool, the stones cold beneath my feet. A single olive tree cast a tangled shadow, its branches swaying in the faint breeze. I stood beneath it, letting my thoughts rise like incense. Before Jesus, my life had been a ruin. I carried wounds no one could see and chains no one could break. People had feared me, whispered about me, judged me. But he had never looked at me with fear or disgust, only recognition. As if he saw not the shards of who I had been, but the whole woman I was meant to become. Now I understood something else. He had entrusted me with the beginning of the story of resurrection. He had chosen me to carry news heavy enough to reorient the world. And though I did not know what the future held, I felt certain it would not allow me to remain hidden in the shadows. Footsteps approached behind me. I turned to see John emerging from the house. His face was lit by moonlight, soft and contemplative. "Mary," he said quietly. I needed to breathe. Smiled. So did I. He joined me under the tree. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he said something that pierced me deeper than he could have known. "You were the first. He chose you." My breath caught. I looked away, suddenly overwhelmed. "I was simply in the garden," I said, though we both knew it was more than that. "I could not leave him." John nodded gently. "Love makes witnesses of us all. But he chose you first." He said it not with envy, nor confusion, nor judgment, but with reverence. Tears welled in my eyes. I still do not know why. His answer was simple. "Because you knew him." I looked at him, puzzled. "We all knew him." John shook his head softly. "Not the same way. You knew him with your whole heart, before the miracles, before the crowds, before the signs. You knew him because he saw you when no one else dared look." My throat tightened. He was right. And that truth, spoken aloud, anchored itself inside me like a stone dropped into deep water. John's gaze grew distant. "There will come a time," he said, "when people will question our testimony. They will question your place among us. They will say your voice is less. But I will remember. And God will remember." My breath trembled. "Do you think the others will accept it?" "One day," he said softly, "the world will know your name." I lowered my eyes, overwhelmed by a mixture of humility and fear. I had never sought glory. I had sought healing. I had sought him. A shout came from inside. Andrew calling for us urgently. John and I rushed back inside. All the disciples were gathered near the table, staring at something that glimmered faintly under the lamplight. Piece of parchment. Peter lifted it with trembling hands. It was a note, sent by someone we did not know. The message was short. Asterisk, "They are searching for his followers." Hide, asterisk. The room tightened with fear again, though weaker than before. Danger had not vanished with the resurrection. If anything, it had grown sharper. Rome would not tolerate unrest. The Sanhedrin would not tolerate rumors of a risen Messiah. And we, fragile, flawed, passionate, were now carriers of a truth the world was not ready to receive. Peter looked at me. "Mary, you should be careful. They know your face." I met his gaze steadily. "Let them know it." He inhaled sharply. "Mary," he said, "they could kill you." "They killed him," I answered quietly. And he rose. Silence fell. Holy kind. A dangerous kind. A necessary kind. The truth had set me free once. Now it was calling me again. Not into safety, but into purpose. By the next morning, Jerusalem felt like a city holding its breath. Word traveled quickly in a place built from narrow streets and shared walls. Rumors spread faster than truth, and fear faster than both. Vendors opened their stalls with trembling hands. Soldiers marched with sharper eyes. Mothers pulled their children inside earlier than usual. Something had shifted, though no one could yet name it. The world senses resurrection even before it believes in it. Inside the house, the disciples argued in hushed voices. About danger, about Rome, about what they should do now that Jesus had appeared alive not once, not twice, but over and over. Every new witness brought a new tremor to the fragile foundations of their fear. But for me, the question was no longer if he lived. It was what living meant, for him, for us, for me. I stood at the doorway, watching the men wrestle with futures they couldn't yet imagine. Peter paced. James sat rigidly, fists clenched. Matthew rubbed his temples, muttering about prophecy and scripture. Thomas stayed quiet, leaning against the wall, still shaken by the moment he had touched the wounds he swore he needed to see. I realized then how different our burdens were. They carried the weight of leadership. I carried the weight of witness. One commands from strength. The other testifies from transformation. Witness is the heavier of the two. John approached me again, his expression thoughtful. "Mary, I know you want to help. But you should rest." Rest. How could I rest when the world was changing beneath our feet? How could I lie down when the one who lifted me from darkness was now calling us to rise with him? But I said nothing. I merely stepped outside, needing air, needing space that didn't echo with male voices unsure whether to trust a woman God himself had trusted. The courtyard was small, but sunlight had begun to find its way into the corners. I sat beneath the olive tree, the same place I had prayed the night before. The branches shook gently above me, as if whispering secrets to the wind. I closed my eyes and let the memories wash over me. The day he healed me. The day he freed me. The day he welcomed me into a community that had never before made space for a woman who bore scars like mine. The day he carried the cross. The day I stood at its foot, unable to do anything but witness the end of the one who once saved me. The morning he called my name in the garden. Every moment was threaded with his voice. As I sat there, a strange calmness washed through me, like being submerged in water, suspended between breaths. It was not peace born of safety. It was peace born of assurance. He is alive. He is working. He is coming again. The door creaked behind me. Peter stepped out, rubbing his forehead. He looked exhausted, body and soul exhausted. When he saw me, he hesitated, as if unsure whether to speak or retreat. Then he sat beside me, back pressed against the same tree. "Mary," he said quietly, "I owe you more than an apology." I turned to him, surprised by the softness in his tone. "You owe me nothing." He shook his head. "I doubted you because I doubted myself. Because I failed him." Pain pulled at his features. He looked older in that moment than I had ever seen him. Older than his years, older than his strength could carry. "You didn't fail him," I said gently. He gave a broken laugh. "I denied him 3 times. Before the rooster crowed, just as he said. I swore I didn't know him. I swore I'd never seen him. I swore it while he watched me from across the courtyard." His voice cracked. "I saw his eyes, Mary. I saw the hurt. I will never forget it." I placed a hand over his. "We all have wounds," I whispered. "But wounds do not stop him from calling us. They never have." Peter looked at me sharply, almost defensively. "And what wound do you bear, Mary? You who had the faith to stay at the tomb, who saw him first, who never ran." I inhaled slowly. Of all the men, Peter understood the least about the battles I had fought. Not because he lacked empathy, but because he had never known what it was like to live with demons of the mind, demons the world could not see. I held his gaze. "My wounds came long before he freed me," I said. "The world wounded me. Darkness wounded me. And sometimes, I wounded myself, believing I was beyond saving." Peter's expression softened as understanding dawned. "But he saw me," I continued. "Not what I'd been. Not what the world said I was. He saw me. And when he called my name in the garden, he resurrected more than his own body. He resurrected my purpose." Tears glistened in Peter's eyes. Not the tears of guilt now, but of recognition. He chose you, he whispered. Not by mistake. Not by chance. No, I said. Because he knew I would go. Because he knew I would speak. Because he knew I would not hide. Peter nodded, and for the first time since the crucifixion, I saw something ignite behind his eyes. Something like fire. Then speak, he said. When the time comes. Speak with all the authority he has given you. Before I could answer, a commotion erupted inside. John burst through the door. Mary! Peter! Come quickly! We ran inside. The disciples were gathered around the table again, but this time something was different. The room vibrated with urgency. Andrew pointed toward the window, his voice shaking. Roman scouts, he said. 2 of them. Asking questions. Looking for followers of the Nazarene. Fear surged through the room like a cold wind. Some stepped back. Others reached for cloaks as if preparing to flee. But I felt something else rising inside me. Something fierce, something steady. Purpose. If they came for us, they would come for me too. I was not blind to that. I was not naive enough to believe I was safe. But I was no longer the woman who hid in corners, trembling at shadows. I had seen the risen Christ. I had heard his voice speak my name. And you cannot fear death, not truly, once you've seen the one who defeated it. The disciples made a plan. Secret exit. Safe house. A place to hide until the danger passed. Peter turned to me. Mary, he said cautiously, stay close. Don't wander alone. They will look for you. I lifted my chin, meeting his worry with certainty. Then let them find me unafraid. He swallowed hard. Sometimes courage looks like strength. Sometimes courage looks like faith. And sometimes courage looks like a woman who refuses to let silence bury the truth God has entrusted her with. The world outside was shifting. Danger was coming. And yet, a quiet conviction settled in my chest. He did not rise for us to hide forever. The time for hiding was ending. The time for witnessing was near. As the sun climbed higher, the city grew louder. Vendors shouting, donkeys braying, pots clattering. But inside that house, the air remained heavy, charged with a tension that vibrated beneath the skin. The disciples continued to prepare the escape route, whispering plans they weren't sure they would have the courage to follow. The warning about Roman scouts had shaken them deeply. Fear changes men. Shrinks some, sharpens others. But in me, something entirely different was unfolding. I stood near the doorway of the back corridor, watching them scramble. John gathering scrolls, Andrew securing the shutters, James pushing a bench against the door. They moved with purpose, and panic mingled into one trembling rhythm. I felt for them. Fear was a familiar companion to every one of us, but it clung to the disciples more fiercely than before. They had always followed Jesus with boldness, but now they were being asked to follow him into uncertainty. I understood uncertainty more intimately than they did. I had lived years in a world where my own mind betrayed me. Following him was the first time I had ever felt safe. And now, he was asking us to walk into the unknown again. But this time, he had given us resurrection to hold on to. As the men whispered, Peter approached me again. His face was pale but determined. Mary, he said, lowering his voice, when they ask about him, how much do you plan to tell? I met his gaze. Everything. He swallowed. Even if it costs your life. It already cost his, I answered. The least I can give is truth. He exhaled shakily, running a hand through his hair. You're braver than we are. No, I said softly. I just remember what it felt like to be dead while still breathing. When he freed me, I promised I would never return to silence. Peter nodded slowly. A new respect flickered in his eyes. Not pity, not confusion, but recognition. The kind one's soul offers to another when both have been broken and rebuilt by the same hands. Before he could reply, a sudden knock boomed at the front door. Not gentle, not questioning, authoritative, commanding, the kind that made blood run cold. Every disciple froze. Even the air seemed to stop moving. John mouthed a silent prayer. Andrew clenched his jaw. Thomas stepped back instinctively, fear resurfacing like a ghost. Another knock. Louder. Open in the name of Rome. My heart quickened, but not with fear. It was something different, resolve. The same resolve I had felt at the cross, at the tomb, in the garden. The resolve of someone who had already seen the worst and lived to tell it. The disciples motioned for silence, the room tightening like a clenched fist. Peter put a finger to his lips and whispered, "Hide. All of you hide." They scattered, behind curtains, into shadowed corners, behind crates and pottery jars. I moved toward the back corridor, but something deep and unwavering, rooted my feet to the floor. If soldiers entered, if they searched, if they asked questions, it would be my testimony they feared most. Women were rarely believed, but women were almost always blamed. I had lived under that weight for years. And yet, I felt no trembling now. Another knock. Fist this time. "We have questions about the Nazarene." Peter, peeking from behind a curtain, motioned frantically for me to move. But I stood still, my breath steady. I wasn't being reckless. I was being obedient to something deeper than fear. Then, just as the soldiers prepared to strike the door again, a voice rose behind us, warm, steady, and unmistakable. "Peace be with you." We turned. He was there. Jesus stood at the center of the room, no door opened, no window unlatched, no shadow parted. He was simply there, radiant, calm, more solid than stone yet lighter than breath. The disciples fell to their knees, tears spilling from eyes that had run dry the night before. But this time, he didn't look at them. He looked at me. His eyes held the same tenderness they had in the garden, but now there was something else too. Purpose, commission, a gravity that pulled at my spirit like the tide pulls the sea. "Mary," he said gently, "do not fear the voices that come seeking to silence you." My breath caught. "You have seen," he continued. "You have known. And what the Father has revealed to you, no man may take away." A warmth spread through my chest, so powerful it nearly brought me to my knees. Then he turned to the others. "Why do your hearts trouble you? Have I not told you these things would come to pass?" The disciples rose slowly, still trembling. Jesus extended his hands, showing the wounds, the reminder of love paid in full. "Touch me," he said. "And no." They approached. Peter placed his hand over the wound in his wrist. John pressed trembling fingers to his palm. Thomas, already undone from the night before, simply wept. Jesus then walked through the room, his presence dissolving the fear like mist under sunlight. The knocking at the door fell silent, as though even Rome itself paused when divinity filled the space. Finally he stopped in front of me again. "Mary," he said, "the message I gave you in the garden is not finished. There is more to tell, more to proclaim. And your voice will carry where theirs cannot." My throat tightened. "Lord, I am only one woman. You are the woman I chose." Something inside me burst, like a clay jar struck by lightning, like stone breaking to reveal water beneath. He touched my forehead with 2 fingers, gentle, burning, eternal. "Do not hide," he said. "You were not called out of darkness to walk back into it." Then the room filled with light. Not blinding, not harsh, living. And when the light faded, he was gone. But the soldiers outside had also gone. The courtyard was silent. Peter approached me, voice trembling. "Mary, what did he mean? Your voice will carry where ours cannot." I took a breath that felt too big for my lungs. "I don't know," I whispered. "But I will find out." For the first time, the disciples looked at me not as the woman who witnessed the empty tomb, not as the one they doubted, not as the one they dismissed, but as someone called, chosen. And as the sun climbed higher, casting gold across the courtyard stones, I felt it fully. My resurrection had only just begun. After the soldiers disappeared and the light of his presence faded from the room, a deep and profound stillness settled over us, one that felt less like silence and more like transition. as if the world itself understood that something had just shifted in its foundation. The disciples looked around at one another with wide eyes, shaken but awakened. Fear had been replaced by something else. Accountability, purpose, calling. For the first time since the crucifixion, I saw in them the spark he had spoken of so many times. The spark that would one day turn fishermen into heralds, tax collectors into teachers, and doubters into martyrs. But none of us, not even they, truly understood the magnitude of what lay ahead. I certainly didn't. Yet his words echoed inside me with a weight I could not ignore. Your voice will carry where theirs cannot. I left the house before noon. I needed to walk, to breathe, to feel the earth under my feet and the sky above my head. The city hummed with life. Markets busy, animals braying, children running through the streets. But beneath the noise, I sensed an undercurrent of unrest. People whispered about missing bodies, strange sightings, Galileans hiding in upper rooms. Rome didn't like questions, and Jerusalem was full of them. I wrapped my shawl tighter around my shoulders, not out of fear but so I could move unnoticed. My steps carried me toward the outskirts, where the noise faded and the earth opened into olive groves and rocky hills, the same places where Jesus had walked, taught, laughed, prayed. I needed space to think, to understand. For years I had been defined by what others said about me. Broken, possessed, unclean. A woman marked by darkness. Cautionary tale. Then he called my name. And everything changed. But now he was calling me again. Not into healing but into mission. Not into restoration but into proclamation. And the weight of that shift pressed against my ribs until breathing felt like revelation. As I walked, memories began to rise inside me, vivid as flames. The day he found me, trembling and lost, eyes hollowed by voices no one else could hear. The moment I felt the darkness flee at his command, as if the universe itself bent its knee to him. The nights I sat at his feet, listening to every word as though each one stitched me back together. The morning at the cross, where my voice failed, but my presence did not. And the garden, always the garden, where he spoke my name and resurrection bloomed in my chest. He had chosen me first. Not because I was strong, not because I was pure, not because I was worthy, but because he knew what the world would try to silence. And he intended to make a witness out of what others had discarded. I reached the top of a small hill overlooking the city. From there, Jerusalem looked ancient and eternal, its walls strong, its streets winding, its future unknowable. But the temple stood brightest among them, gleaming with gold that caught the sun like a crown. I thought of the priests inside, the ones who had condemned him, the ones who feared losing control. They believed his death would quiet the crowds. They believed the tomb would silence him. They underestimated him. They underestimated God. They underestimated me. The wind picked up, cold and sharp, wrapping around me like a mantle. I closed my eyes and let it sink into my bones. "What do you want from me now?" I whispered. No voice answered. No vision appeared. No thunder rolled. But something inside me shifted, like a door unlocking from within. I felt clarity settle low and steady in my belly. He wanted me to speak. He wanted me to go where others would not. To testify in places the disciples couldn't enter. To bring his story into homes, into markets, into hearts that had been wounded like mine. He wanted me to carry resurrection into darkness. As I inhaled deeply, I sensed movement behind me, quiet and hesitant. I turned to see John walking up the hill, his cloak fluttering behind him. "I knew you'd come here," he said. I smiled softly. "How?" "Because this is where he would have come." John stood beside me and stared out over the city. "We have work to do, Mary. All of us." "Yes," I said. "But he gave each of us different work." John nodded, thoughtful. "What did he mean, when he said your voice would carry where ours cannot?" I hesitated. Not from doubt but reverence. "I think," I said slowly, "he meant I will speak to the hearts that refuse to listen to you. Women who live unseen. Men crushed by shame. The broken. The doubted. The discarded. People who look like who I once was. John's eyes softened. Then the world will hear him twice, once through us and once through you. The wind swept around us again, stronger this time. It lifted John's hair, brushed against my face, carried the distant sounds of the city up the hill. He exhaled. The others will step into their calling soon. Peter especially. And mine? Yes. He looked at me with a knowing too deep for words. Yours began the moment he said your name. We started walking back toward the city together. The sun hung high now, warm and bright, as if blessing every step we took. When we reached the streets again, the noise of life surged around us. But fear did not return. The danger was still real. Rome would not rest, the priests would not yield, but fear had lost its throne. When I re-entered the house, the disciples looked at me differently. Not with suspicion, not with confusion, but with recognition. They didn't speak it aloud, but I felt it in the air. I was no longer simply Mary Magdalene, disciple and witness. I was Mary, apostle to apostles. Mary, first messenger of the resurrection. Mary, the one who carried the truth no tomb could hold. Night approached, casting long shadows across the walls. The disciples began to pray softly, their voices rising like the first sparks of a coming fire. And I stood among them, heart steady, breath calm, purpose burning through me like a living flame. The world would try to silence me, but I had heard him call my name. And once the Messiah calls you, you do not remain quiet. Not ever again.